Hey, this will start off with a shameless plug. Go to patreon.com/slingshot esports if you like my work or you like the work of the other Slingshot content creators like DK, Emily, or Andrew. And if you pay $5, you can get into our Discord. And I swear to God, none of us will wish coke overdose or testicular cancer or any kind of death upon any other person, unlike Riot. So, shameless plug over. Let's talk about the real thing. Today's topic is going to be about SK. Now, SK, in my opinion, has been the best team of 2017 overall. Astralis had that great dominant period early on with Virtus Pro. Then you had FaZe rise up, but I feel SK in the mid half of 2017 exceeded everybody else, and they had good results in the beginning. And when we look at the overall trajectory of this team, you see at the E-League Major, they had a stand-in with Fox, and it was a it was a much more tactical team. But at that tournament, I felt that was the rise of Fur as a superstar level player, because I feel he was the best player on that team. Could have arguably been the MVP if depending on how you want to look at the MVP criteria. Definitely an incredible player, and it was pretty clear that SK should eventually play around this guy because he was so fucking amazing. So when they brought in Phelps, their initial reaction was into the next event was, okay, let's play around Phelps, because at the time they only had, I think, a day or two before the next event. I think it was Vegas. So they thought to themselves, okay, we don't really have time to prep our maps, so let's just play a bit loose. Let's play around Phelps and his play style. And it worked really well. They got second place, lost to Virtus Pro when Virtus Pro was still an amazing team. And then they go to IM Katowice, and the IM Katowice, like, their Starfire was still going off. Phelps was still good, Fur was still good, Cold was still good, but they ended up going on in groups. And this was an alarm for them. At that point, they realized, okay, this loose style, like, it got us to the finals of a tournament, but it also let us drop out of group stages, and that's not consistent enough for us as a team, because they want to be, the best team in the world. So they decided to put in more structure, and then eventually they come around to this style where basically their two superstar players are Fur and Cold Zero, and in my system, I've rated it as like a 1-1-4-4-6. So Fur gets all the resources he needs, Cold Zero gets all the resources he needs. Fallen and Phelps are more on the supportive end as an upper and as a rifler, but they get like bits and pieces of their roles. Like, for instance, Phelps during this time he played more a supportive role with Fallen, so that Fallen's op could be more impactful into the game. And then Taco is a 6, basically he's just filling out the rest of the roles and facilitating the others, creating space, that kind of thing. And then they win CS Summit, they win Sydney, they win Summer, I think, and then in between that they lose to G2 at ESL Pro League in a best of 3, but then they also win ECS, and then they win ESL Cologne. So pretty good tournaments across the board, some really big, some medium, some small. And then they go into Krakow Major, and even though they lose in the playoffs, they lost in, I think, in a manner where you can't really blame them, because Astralis really were amazing on that day. That was a really good series, and Device really, he really read fucking Fallen like a book. So there wasn't really SK played their best, but Astralis were clearly better on that day. No problem there. And so when the player break happened, I was just thinking in my head, okay, SK, when they come back, they'll probably start dominating again, because it really took everything Astralis had in order to stop them. And that's not something I think Astralis can do consistently, at least the form Astralis were in at the time. And they come off the break, and they're worse than they've been since the very beginning of this lineup. So Al Malmo, they lost in the playoffs, to G2, which is fine, but they also lost in the group stages to North in a best of 3, their first ever loss to that lineup, even though it's a new lineup, but I also include the previous iterations with Magisboy and Rubino. And then at ESG Tour Makinos, this is where alarm bells start ringing a little bit, and they lose to Liquid in a fashion unlike SK. where they were never really into the game. They weren't pulling off bullshit like heroic plays like they usually do. So you're thinking in your head, okay, maybe it's just a break. Maybe there's just something off with this team. They go to ESL New York. You're thinking, okay, we'll grind it back. We'll get back into it. And then they lose to Liquid again in the playoffs. And this was like an SK that was much better, but not in complete form. At least relative to where I think they should have been. And they lose there, and you're thinking, okay, well, at this point, Liquid, I consider Liquid an elite team. So even though it's a loss, it's not that bad of a loss. And then this also makes Mykonos not look as bad in retrospect. But then you go to E-League Group D, and this is a group of death, right? With Astralis, SK, and Liquid. And they lose to Heroic in the first best of one, but then they beat Liquid in a very good best of three. Especially that Mirage game, fantastic. You should definitely watch that. I think it's one of the better games of the year. But the problem is with this SK is it looked like they really came back to form, and even then, like it took everything they had to beat Liquid, which probably shows like the increasing trend of Liquid becoming a elite team. But at the same time, SK lost to Heroic in a weird, and usually the losses don't mean that much depending on how you lose, but this was a super weird loss by SK because it looked like they were back on like that Mykonos form where it nothing really looked good for them. They were never really into the game. Yeah, they won a map, but it's like the other two were trash kind of, especially concerning because the last map was Mirage, where that was one of their home maps. So overall, you have to, after 4 tournaments, you have to conclude SK is in a slump, and there's something going wrong with this team. And it can't just be attributed to the player break, because, yeah, they're off, but they've been off since the player break, but there's a bunch of weird things going on just within the server. For instance, their team play aspects are, like, breaking apart a bit, and this is the most prevalent in Inferno, where they put up a weird setup with Fur and Phelps on the B side, but they're either way too aggressive and they push when in a power play situation, which is unlike SK, and then give the advantage back to the other team, or they're super passive, don't control it at all, or they just die trying to control B. So it's a very weird setup, and the reason it's weird is because I felt like the Fur Fallen setup was pretty good. Like, it wasn't like the world's best, but it was competitive and it was working. But in this current setup, it's not really good for them, and I feel like that's been their prevalent like weakness for that map, and what has dropped their Inferno from equal to a huge liability, where it's like you might even want to like permaban this. If they played Nuke at all, maybe they should have permaban switched. But unfortunately for them, they don't. So every team is going to get like a close to a free win if they just pick Inferno against SK in a best of 3. So that's a huge problem. The other problem is Phelps. And Phelps is really weird, just his trajectory as a player for this year. Because he started off as a star player within the team at Vegas when they were playing around him in the loose style. But when they realized that didn't work, they switched him to a supportive role, and this was always a question as to how well was he going to fit into this more team-oriented role. And then the answer was it was fine. It was completely great. Like, he was a really strong third star. Like, he was putting up the frags. He was still getting impact. He was facilitating his players. He was like, he was helping. He was fitting in, right? And I thought, okay, so I guess there's more to Phelps than I thought as just like a pure star player type. But now that they've come off the break, like, it feels like everything he did during that time was undone or something. Like, everything, I'm not even sure if they were teaching him as much as just directing him at this point, because a lot of the individual moves he makes are like way too aggressive, way too like I have to kill them or I lose kind of like mentality. There was this weird like push into be a banana on Inferno where he basically runs into a Molotov and then dies, and I don't know why he does this. Then it's not like he was blind or anything. It's not like he could have just stayed where he was and then he wouldn't have died, but he just ran into it, and it was very confusing. So I feel like Phelps has basically lost his role within this team, and I'm not sure why that happened. And then there's a few other pieces that are kind of wonky right now. Like Fallen's about the same as he was, but when I say that he's just about the same as he was, I'm talking about in 2017 rather than 2016. So in 2017, a majority of his like huge impact plays come from hero plays, whereas in 2016 he was doing everything with the op. So because of that, because of that, he isn't really Fallen as a player isn't reliable enough right now to become like a pure star of the team, as he was in 2016 when they first created this major winning lineup where he was like one of the stars along with Coldzera. And then, so yeah, he's fine just individually because he hasn't changed, I guess. But because of that, that means that Burden has to go on either Phelps, who I already mentioned is like in this weird place right now, and then there's Fur. And Fur has been one of the best players of 2017. Still, I think, in the running for player of the year in CSGO. And he's basically marked the T side. Like, the entire T side is built around Fur, I feel like. And his style is so... It's like a battering ram. It's so aggressive, it's so in your face, and people know it's coming, but they can't stop. They weren't able to stop it for months. And like he'd just go in and kill people, right? And while it was incredible to watch, it didn't seem sustainable. And then and if his skill ever went down, whereas like the skill of the other like players and teams go up and they start like adapting to him better and better as time goes on, eventually it was gonna hit a brick wall, and we're starting to see cracks of that where like against Heroic, like he got nothing done on Mirage, and that's usually his fucking map. So while I still think Fur is like a star player, it's no longer the case that they can just rely purely on him to an extent. So SK is kind of weird in that sense because it's like half loose, half like tactical, and I feel they're gonna have to go to a more tactical side soon because I don't think it's possible for Fur to just keep playing like this if you just given the overall trend of the team. Coldzera is still a god, so we can skip past him. And then you have Taco, who I think is in worse form than he has been. But even given that, just because of his role in the team as like a 6, where like he gets no resources to shine, so to speak, you have to look at what he does overall and what he's doing. So he's not losing rounds. He's not like throwing rounds like Phelps is, and he's creating space on the entry. He's facilitating his team. I still don't think he's a bad. I still think he fits in the team. I wouldn't cut him or anything weird like that. So even though like his overall like stats have been getting worse, I still think he's a good contributor to the team. And I don't really blame him for like the messes the team is in. It's more that I think his failing form is a symptom of the other problems of the team because he's a team player. So if the overall team is weak, then he himself will also look weak. That's my theory as to his own like weakening form over this period, over this current like slump SK have been in. So now that I described the slump, you have to think about the solutions. And I know the obvious one would be a roster change, and there's no better time to do it just because Bolts is the obvious next best choice. And he'd fit into the supportive role that you were trying to put Phelps into, and he has like good history with the players of SK as far as I know. So I think that's a natural fit. At the same time, it would work both ways because Immortals does need a star player, and Phelps is a fucking star player, a really really good one if he's allowed to take on that role again. And so that's the obvious choice. But given the history of SK as a team, SK as a player, as players, I think they're going to ride this out for a little bit longer, maybe 1 or 2 more months. Because if you just look at the overall, the way they think about it, they want to get, as long as Phelps himself is putting in the work, they won't cut him. Rather, they'll give him as many chances as they can get. They'll even try to like change the team. And the thing about this team is they have a lot of luxury in that sense because beyond Fur being a star player, Phelps could also be a star player, and then Fur proved he can play like that supportive role in 2016. So they could just switch those roles around, and that could be enough. They could fix up their CT sides, especially Inferno. Just either revert back or change it to have Cold B on B again. Something different like that could work for them, and stave off that problem. Beyond that, though, is this sustainable for SK? I still think so. I mean, I'm while I think the roster shuffle, if they did one for Bolts for Phelps, it would be a good idea. Like I said, I don't think it's as quite necessary yet, and so the question for SK is going into, because right now they're going to be on break because there's a small gap between now and their next tournament. So going to the next tournament, whichever one that is, that's the stuff you want to see. You want to see how good their CT sides are, how strong Fur and Phelps are going, and then we'll see if anything has changed. If it hasn't changed by like the next two tournaments, at that point I think you need to do the roster shuffle. But for now, and usually when you just think about the opportunity cost of a roster shuffle, you would want to do it immediately just because it's not like you can lock on these players forever, but just because of the entire Immortal situation, I think you probably have a bit more time before you have to like pull the trigger on this. So I think SK will, for now, stick with this 5. And the final question is probably going to be how they're going to formulate their identity as a team. If they decide to switch, maybe, for instance, put Phelps into a star role and then Fur back into the support role just to get Phelps rolling again, or if they can somehow make Phelps remember how to play the support role like he did like for the months prior. That's about it. See you later.